When I walked into the living room that Sunday afternoon, I wasn't expecting anything unusual. Just a quiet weekend visit to my sister's place, some coffee, maybe a little small talk, and then back home. But something felt off the moment I stepped through the door. The air was tense, thick with something unspoken. And then I saw him, my step-nephew, Dylan, sitting on the edge of the couch, his hands visibly shaking, his eyes darting between the floor and the hallway like he was hiding from a ghost. At first, I thought maybe he was just anxious, maybe school stress, maybe an argument with his mom. But when he finally looked up at me, there was a kind of panic in his eyes I couldn't ignore. He tried to smile, said everything was fine, but it wasn't. His voice cracked mid-sentence, and his hand twitched like he couldn't control it. I asked him gently what was going on, but he just shrugged and mumbled something about being tired. Dylan was always a quiet kid, polite, soft-spoken, and a little on the shy side. But that day, his whole energy was different. It wasn't just nerves. It was fear. Real fear. I could feel it, even though he didn't say it outright. Something was eating him up inside, and he was trying hard to hold it together. But it was slipping. I glanced toward the hallway. The door to his mom's room, my stepsister Lila, was slightly ajar. I could hear soft murmurs coming from inside. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was on the phone. But Dylan kept glancing at that door, and every time he did, his jaw clenched tighter. That's when I knew, whatever was going on, it had something to do with what was happening behind that door. I wanted to say something, to push a little harder, but I didn't want to scare him off. So I sat beside him and waited. Let the silence hang. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words, and I hoped he'd fill it with the truth. Instead, he just sat there, fists balled in his lap, chest rising and falling like he'd just run a mile. And then, right when I was about to ask again, we both heard it. A voice. A man's voice. From inside Lila's room. Not loud, not shouting. Just calm and low. But it wasn't her husband's voice. That much I knew for sure. Because her husband, Dylan's stepdad, was supposed to be on a business trip 3 states away. Dylan stiffened. His hands started shaking again, worse this time. I turned to him, heart pounding, and whispered, "Who's in there?" He didn't say a word. Just stared at the wall with tears forming in his eyes. And in that moment, I realized something much deeper was unraveling beneath the surface, something no one in this house had the courage to face. And that's when the bedroom door creaked open. The bedroom door creaked open slowly, and both of us turned our heads at the same time. I held my breath. Dylan froze completely. For a split second, I expected Lila to come out, maybe holding a laundry basket, maybe on a call, something normal. But it wasn't her. A man stepped out. He looked about mid-30s, a little too relaxed, wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans, with messy hair like he'd just woken up from a nap. He didn't even look surprised to see me sitting there. Our eyes met for half a second. He gave me a small, awkward nod and walked past like he belonged there. Not a single word. Not a glance at Dylan. He just walked toward the front door and let himself out like it was the most natural thing in the world. I couldn't even react. I just sat there, trying to piece together who this guy was and what he had been doing in my stepsister's bedroom. Dylan looked like he was about to fall apart. He stood up abruptly and walked to the kitchen without saying a word. I followed him, still trying to stay calm, but my thoughts were racing. Who was that man? Why did Dylan look like he'd been carrying the secret for days, maybe weeks? And where was Lila now? I knew I couldn't ask him anything right away. He was already at his breaking point. I watched as he filled a glass of water, his hands still trembling. He tried to take a sip but spilled half of it on the counter. I handed him a paper towel without saying a word, and he just stood there, head down, avoiding eye contact. "I didn't mean for you to see that," he finally said in a low voice. I didn't push. I just asked, "How long has this been going on?" He hesitated. Looked toward the hallway, then back at me. A while, he whispered. But I wasn't supposed to say anything. She said it wasn't my business. That hit me harder than I expected. He had known. He had heard things. Seen things. And instead of talking to anyone, he had been carrying it all alone, confused, scared, and now stuck between loyalty and truth. This wasn't just about infidelity. This was about the emotional weight put on a teenage boy who should never have been put in that position. And as I stood there, still reeling from what I'd just seen, I heard footsteps coming down the hall. Lila was finally coming out of the bedroom. My heart started pounding again, because I had no idea what I was going to say, or what she was about to admit. Lila stepped into the kitchen like nothing was out of the ordinary. Her hair was tied up, and she was wearing an old hoodie and leggings, like she'd just gotten out of bed. She looked at me, then at Dylan, and gave a casual smile, like we were just two people chatting over coffee. "Hey, didn't know you were stopping by," she said lightly, opening the fridge like we hadn't just watched a man leave her bedroom. I didn't answer right away. My eyes followed her every move, waiting, hoping, for some kind of explanation. But she didn't offer one. Not even a hint of guilt in her tone. Just silence, and the humming of the fridge. Dylan stepped back like he didn't want to be in the room anymore. I saw it in his eyes, he didn't want a scene, and he didn't want to be the one to force the truth out either. "Who was that man, Lila?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She paused, her back still turned to me. For a second, I thought she wasn't going to answer. But then she grabbed a bottle of juice and turned around slowly. "Just a friend," she said casually, brushing it off like I'd asked about someone delivering mail. "Your husband's out of town," I said, more firmly this time. "And your friend just walked out of your bedroom." She sighed like she was tired of the conversation before it even started. "Please don't make this a big deal. It's complicated." That was the first time I really looked at her, really saw her. There was something cold in her expression, like she'd already built walls around the truth and wasn't ready to break them down. But this wasn't just about her. It was about Dylan too. He was standing in the doorway now, watching everything, stuck between silence and the storm. I looked back at him and he looked away, ashamed or hurt, I couldn't tell which. That's when it hit me, this wasn't the first time he'd witnessed something like this. Maybe it had happened before. Maybe this was a pattern, and he'd been living in it quietly, trying to process it all on his own. I wanted to ask more. I wanted answers. But the words got caught in my throat. Because deep down, I knew, whatever was going on in this house was deeper than a single mistake. And we hadn't even scratched the surface. I didn't say anything after that. I just stood there, staring at her, trying to figure out if she even cared how her choices were affecting Dylan. The tension in the room was so heavy, it felt like even the air had stopped moving. Lila sipped her juice like it was any other day, then turned and left the kitchen, leaving behind a silence that felt louder than any words she could have spoken. Dylan sat down at the table, shoulders hunched, his fingers tapping nervously against the wood. I sat across from him, unsure of what to say. I didn't want to corner him, but I also couldn't ignore the look on his face, like he was holding something back. Something big. He glanced at the hallway, then lowered his voice. "He's not the only one," he said, barely above a whisper. Those words hit me like a cold wave. "What do you mean?" He swallowed hard. "There've been others. She thinks I don't notice, but I do. Different voices. Different faces. Sometimes late at night. Sometimes when she thinks I'm at school." He stopped tapping. "I hear everything." I leaned in, shocked. "Does your stepdad know?" He shook his head. "I don't think so. He's always away. Work, travel, whatever. She says he's boring now. That he doesn't pay attention to her anymore." The pain in his voice wasn't just about betrayal. It was about being a teenager caught in an adult mess he didn't ask for. And no one had protected him from it. Not his mom. Not his stepdad. No one. I looked at him, heart racing. Why didn't you tell anyone? He looked up at me, eyes wide. Because no one would believe me. And if he finds out the wrong way, everything's going to blow up. Just then, we both heard the front door creak again. Heavy footsteps. Dylan's eyes went wide with panic. He stood up quickly. I turned toward the door and froze. There he was, Lila's husband, walking in, suitcase in hand, earlier than expected. He looked around, clearly confused by the silence. Hey, he said, setting his bag down. Didn't think I'd be back before Monday. No one answered. Not me. Not Dylan. Because in that moment, we both knew the lies were about to catch up to the truth. And nothing in this house was ever going to be the same again. Lila came out of her room a few seconds after her husband walked in, pretending to be surprised. You're back early, she said, forcing a smile. Her voice was calm, too calm, like she'd rehearsed that exact line in her head. But I could see it in her eyes, the panic. The calculation. She didn't expect him to walk in just yet. He smiled back, clearly happy to see her. Yeah, flights were earlier than planned. Thought I'd surprise you. He gave her a quick hug and kissed her on the cheek. She stiffened just a little. Barely noticeable to someone not paying attention. But I was watching everything. Dylan didn't move. He stood behind me, frozen like a statue, eyes fixed on the floor. His stepdad finally noticed him and walked over. Hey, bud. You okay? He ruffled Dylan's hair like nothing was wrong, completely unaware of the emotional storm his stepson had been living through. Yeah, Dylan mumbled, not lifting his head. His stepdad turned toward me, clearly picking up on the tension now. Everything all right? I forced a polite smile. Just got here myself. Caught up with Dylan for a bit. Before he could respond, Lila interrupted. Why don't you go unpack, babe? I'll make some coffee. He nodded and walked toward the bedroom, dragging his suitcase behind him. Lila stood still for a second, her face pale. Then she turned to Dylan with a sharp look, one that wasn't meant for me to see. A silent warning. But something had changed in Dylan. Maybe it was having me there. Maybe it was just the pressure finally cracking him open. Because as soon as his stepdad disappeared into the bedroom, Dylan looked at me and said, loud enough for her to hear, "Are you going to tell him?" Lila's face went white. Dylan, she snapped under her breath. My heart stopped. What's going on? His stepdad's voice echoed from the bedroom. Lila rushed toward him, nothing. Just talking with them, but Dylan didn't stop this time. His voice was shaking, but steady. She's been lying. There's been other men. While you were gone. The hallway went silent. The kind of silence where everyone holds their breath. And then, a new sound. Something falling in the bedroom. A loud thud. Lila gasped and rushed toward the room. I followed, my heart thudding in my chest. Dylan stayed behind, too scared to move. When I reached the bedroom door, her husband was standing over his open suitcase, his hand holding something I never expected. A small black box. A velvet one. I came back early to surprise her, he said, eyes not leaving the box. I was going to propose again. A new ring. A new start. I thought maybe we just needed something to fix things, his voice cracked. The room felt like it had stopped spinning. Lila stood behind him, speechless. He slowly turned around. But now I need to know, how long has this been going on? And just like that, everything that had been hiding in the shadows was being dragged into the light. Lila didn't answer him right away. Her lips parted like she wanted to speak, but no sound came out. Her eyes were locked on the small velvet box in his hand, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her face, fear of losing everything. Her husband held the box for a few more seconds, then set it down on the dresser like it weighed more than he could carry. He turned toward her, his voice cold and cracked. "I need the truth. Now." She hesitated, but Dylan's voice cut through the silence. "It's been months. Maybe longer. I don't even know all the names." Layla spun toward him. "Dylan, stop!" he snapped, louder now, his hands balled into fists. "I kept your secrets. I didn't tell anyone even when I wanted to. But I'm done. He deserves to know." Her husband stared at her, eyes wide with disbelief. "Is that true? All this time?" He took a step back like the air in the room was too heavy to breathe. Lila finally broke, tears running down her face. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she said quietly. "You were always gone. I felt alone. I just wanted to feel something again." He shook his head. "So you lied. Over and over. While I was out working, trying to support this family." The pain in his voice was sharp. It filled the room like thunder. Dylan sat down at the edge of the bed, burying his face in his hands. I stood by the door, feeling like I was caught in a storm I couldn't stop. Then came the twist none of us saw coming. Lila's husband pulled out his phone, face blank, and tapped the screen a few times. "I had my doubts," he said. "So I put a camera in the living room last month. Thought I was just being paranoid." He looked straight at her. "Turns out, I wasn't." Layla froze. Her face dropped. "What?" He turned the screen toward her. "Video files. Dates. Times. I saw a man walk in the front door. Then another, a few days later. You thought you were being careful. You weren't." His voice was colder now, not angry, just done. "I stayed quiet because I wanted to see how far you'd go." For a moment, no one said a word. Then Lila started crying, pleading, saying it didn't mean anything. But he wasn't listening. He picked up the ring box, shoved it back into his suitcase, and looked at Dylan. "You don't deserve this. I'm sorry you had to go through it." Dylan nodded, eyes red, finally letting the truth breathe. And as her husband walked out the door, leaving behind the ring, the lies, and the broken promises, none of us knew what would happen next. But the damage was done. The truth was out. And nothing in that house would ever be the same again. The door closed behind him with a soft thud that somehow felt louder than anything said that day. Dylan and I sat in silence for a while, the tension still thick in the air. Lila collapsed onto the couch, her face buried in her hands, crying quietly. But no one rushed to comfort her. Not this time. The truth had landed, and the weight of it was finally being felt by everyone. I walked over to Dylan and sat beside him. He looked exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally drained from carrying something no kid should ever have to deal with. "You okay?" I asked gently. He nodded slowly. "I think so. I feel lighter." That made sense. For months, maybe even longer, he had been holding on to this secret, watching everything unfold in front of him and feeling helpless to stop it. Now it was out. The truth, though painful, had finally been spoken. And in a strange way, that was a kind of freedom. Over the next few days, things shifted in the house. Layla barely spoke. She mostly stayed in her room, quiet, almost invisible. Her husband didn't return, and no one knew if he ever would. But Dylan, he started to change. He spoke more. He smiled, even if just a little. And one evening, as we were having dinner at a small diner near the neighborhood, he looked up at me and said, "Thank you for not leaving when things got uncomfortable." That moment stuck with me. Because sometimes, the real damage in infidelity isn't just between two people in a relationship, it ripples out, quietly hurting the ones around them. especially the kids. Especially the ones who are told to stay silent. In the weeks that followed, Lila admitted to needing help. She started seeing a counselor. I don't know if she did it for herself or for Dylan, but it was something. Dylan's stepdad didn't come back, at least not right away. But he called Dylan. Talked to him. Promised that none of this was his fault and that he'd still be part of his life. That meant more to Dylan than anything. This true story wasn't just about betrayal. It was about what happens when silence becomes too loud to ignore. When secrets come to the surface and force everyone to look at themselves honestly. It was a reminder that relationships, trust, and emotional safety are all connected, and when one breaks, the rest suffer too. If there's one takeaway, it's this: honesty may hurt in the moment, but silence stretches the pain. If someone you love is struggling in silence, speak up. Sometimes, just being there, truly being there, is what saves them. Thank you for watching this true infidelity story. For more real-life stories like this one, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time. 20.